Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Becoming Secure. I'm your host, Emily, dating and relationship coach specializing in all things attachment. And today we are talking about what do you do? How do you feel? How do you process when he moves on really quickly and you don't? Have you ever been through this sort of situation where maybe the relationship was really short or maybe it was really long and it just seems like he's fine after it happens and it's so confusing. Maybe he moved on really quickly with someone else, jumped into another relationship, or maybe he just seems unfazed by the ending of things when you're like so in your feels and so upset about it. Or maybe he wants to jump straight into being friends with you, and it's kind of making you feel like you're crazy or weird or even weak for not being able to do that. Like there's something wrong with you for needing some space and not feeling okay right away. And the fact that he seemed to move on so quickly may have you questioning if you really meant anything to him or not. Like, was the connection really real? Were his feelings really real? So, today we're breaking down why this happens, what it actually means when your ex moves on quickly and you don't. And it's probably not what you actually think. So, first and foremost, I want to address this idea of the fact that the connection maybe wasn't as real or meaningful. So, him moving on super quickly and you taking longer isn't so much a reflection of the depth and meaning or the seriousness of the connection. It's actually more of a reflection on how each of you copes emotionally with breakups and the fact that you do it in different ways. So he copes differently than you do, most likely because he has a different attachment style than you do, or because this dynamic brought out different sides of your individual attachment styles. So for example, if you're both fearful avoidants who have an anxious and an avoidant side, maybe in this dynamic, he was the more avoidant leaning one. And so that brought out more of your anxious side. So you're kind of experiencing different sides or different tendencies of your attachment style in the, aftermath of this breakup. So rather than him moving on quickly, meaning that your connection wasn't real or genuine, because at the end of the day, it's not really like what happens now, what happens moving forward, that's one thing, but no one can take away what you felt for that person. No one can take away the fact that your feelings were genuine and your feelings were real. It doesn't really matter, what happens now or what his response was. Like you get to have that knowing that it was real for you. And, can you let that be enough, regardless of what he ends up doing? And it also doesn't mean anything about your value either. It doesn't mean that you're, not good enough or too much or replaceable. One that comes up a lot with clients and that I felt too is feeling like maybe you weren't actually special to that person or special in general with the fact that they could just go out and maybe start dating someone else or move on quickly. So again, it's not about the connection. It's about how he copes with his emotions. And there are a couple different scenarios of, people moving on quickly and the different attachment styles and attachment tendencies where this can happen. And so we're going to break down a few different scenarios of those things. So the first one I want to talk about is, the one that kind of pulls away suddenly after seeing you for only a few months. And we're going to talk about ones who seem to move on quickly after a more significant relationship in just a minute as well. So, the tendencies that we typically see with avoidant attachment styles are first and foremost, here's one. If the person pulled away very suddenly after a really intense month or a few months of dating, especially coming on quite strong, very intense chemistry. Things moved very fast. You spent a lot of time together, and then maybe it like fell off, or he abruptly is like, I, am not ready, or I just, don't think I can give you what you want. This is most likely a fearful avoidant attachment style that you're dealing with who has pretty low self-awareness and a low or limited ability to deal with their triggers and fears. So then the fearful avoidant tends to run or pull away when they start getting triggered by the closeness of the connection. And this usually happens before they actually let themselves feel truly vulnerable with that person. So that can be part of why maybe this person moves on quickly and starts dating someone else. And you're like, well, but we had such an amazing connection. And now, like a month or however long later, you're seeing someone else. And you're like, have I just been replaced? Maybe it wasn't real. So, a key part of this is that they can be really good at having a lot of what like seems to be really deep, meaningful conversations where they seem to be sharing vulnerable topics with you. It seems like they're really letting you in, but that doesn't actually mean that they're sharing things that are vulnerable for them. And there is this way that they can kind of talk about vulnerable topics, but actually are still sort of holding them or holding you at a distance. So it's not really things that are truly vulnerable for them to share. They're just talking about vulnerable topics that and revealing the things that don't maybe feel as vulnerable for them. So, fearful avoidance can seem, especially maybe some of the anxious leaning ones, can seem really warm on the surface and maybe seem like they're really into you and they're kind of anxiously attaching to you at the beginning. But internally, there's actually a lot of suspicion and kind of a lack of trust, whether they're aware of it or not, throughout this dating process. And so they're really spending a lot of time actually evaluating you and whether they can trust you. Again, whether they're aware of it or not, they're kind of just constantly like their radar is always picking up things and sensing things. And they're just trying to see, okay, can I trust this person? Am I going to feel safe with this person? And someone who's low in awareness, maybe picking up on things that are like, oh, I'm not going to be safe with this person that aren't actually legitimate because they don't know how to work through their own triggers. So someone who's more aware is going to be like, okay, this tendency is happening. I see it. I am getting triggered here, but I'm not going to end the connection because of that. I can actually recognize that this is a me thing and not really a reflection of the person that I'm seeing. So there can be this sort of duality when you're dating these fearful avoidants where they seem super warm and open, but they're actually quite guarded internally. And as they're kind of trying to figure you out, trying to understand you, trying to figure out, are you going to hurt me? Are you not? Is this safe? And what this means is that when they move on quickly with someone else, it's often that they didn't really let themselves get truly attached to the same degree that maybe you did. Again, they were kind of giving you pieces that maybe seemed like vulnerability, but they weren't actually attached to the same level. And again, that doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't make you dumb. It doesn't make you stupid or an idiot for not realizing that. It doesn't make them connection not meaningful either. This is just a feature of this person's survival strategy where they grew up with inconsistent or sometimes even abusive caregivers who created a lot of wounds around trust for them. And so they learned that they can't really trust others and have these deep fears that when I let someone in, when I really get close to someone, I'm going to get hurt. So when you experience situations like this, the important thing to realize is that it's not about you. And also begin to vet for that person's level of emotional availability because it doesn't make you dumb for opening up and actually being vulnerable with that person. That shows that maybe you do have a greater sense of, your ability to trust other people and to trust yourself. On the flip side of that, it could mean that you were anxiously attaching to that person and didn't necessarily do your proper vetting. If they pulled away like this, I'm going to say there's a good chance you didn't actually vet properly. If it felt very blindsiding and you're like confused about what happened, there's definitely some vetting that needed to happen there. Needed to attach a little bit more securely to this person. But my whole point is keeping someone at arm's length and giving them kind of the guise of vulnerability, but not actually being vulnerable and then being able to move on quickly. That's not healthy either. And someone who's securely attached isn't like giving you this illusion of vulnerability. They actually are able to be vulnerable and they're not going to like flip on you because they're like, okay, I'm kind of watching you, I'm trying to suss you out. And I actually am seeming one way on the surface, again, this duality, but then internally, I'm very guarded and suspicious of you. And all of this is subconscious, right? They're not trying to do this. The unfortunate thing is just that when they're low in awareness and they don't know how to manage these things, you're going to have some situations like the one that you probably went through, which is why you're listening to this podcast episode. So, when you begin to vet for that emotional availability a bit more, you're going to find that you can avoid situations like this more. And remember, you deserve to be with someone who's self-aware enough to handle their own triggers and not run when the connection deepens. And these are also going to be the people who can grieve properly and aren't jumping from relationship to relationship either. So, another scenario is when this could be a sort of rebounding thing. So, another client of mine has a more dismissive, avoidant leaning, fearful, avoidant attachment style. So, again, we're thinking about the poles of the anxious and avoidant sides of a fearful, avoidant. So she was a lot more avoidant leaning in her attachment. And she started dating a fearful avoidant who was more anxious leaning. And they dated for a couple months. And there was a period of time where he was not as responsive as she wanted. She was dealing with some family things that were very difficult. And her communication really like dropped off significantly. And she communicated a little bit about what was happening, but it felt like such a pullback for him, and this is kind of that dismissive side coming out where she was pulling away out of overwhelm. And this was incredibly triggering for this more anxious, fearful, avoidant. I think it would be triggering for most people to just like really stop hearing much at all from the person that you're seeing, especially when they're going through a hard time. And, that's something that is hers to continue working on, right? Not saying she handled this perfectly either. But what happened was this really triggered the man that she was seeing, and he likely felt, maybe betrayed or trapped, or it was kind of that, yeah, trust, that betrayal wound of I thought you were this person for me or this safe person, and then I'm getting really hurt now by the way that you're withdrawing. And so there was sort of this intense swing, which is very characteristic of the fearful avoidant, from like, I'm anxious and trying to get a response to, oh, I'm realizing I can't, to a hard swing avoidant. And he essentially turned around and ghosted her and moved on and started dating someone immediately. And he wasn't really moving on in this situation. What was actually happening is he was reacting from a very triggered place and kind of trying to pacify his emotions with someone else. And it's sort of this like internal kind of story that's like, well, if you won't give me what I need, then I'll just find someone else who will. Or like if like you're gonna hurt me in this way, then I'll just kind of replace you. And it is almost like a revenge seeking sort of thing, and it's not even really intentional. It's just this betrayal wound hits on such a it's such a deep wound, a core wound for the fearful avoidance, that they have that hard swing of like, I really want you. Well, okay, you hurt me. I don't need you. And I'm going to prove it. I'm going to show it to you. Again, all of this subconscious. It's their survival patterns, survival tendencies. And maybe you can even recognize some times where you might have done this if you're a fearful avoidant or might be thinking you are. And this can leave you feeling like you're discarded because it seems like they move on really quickly. But what's actually happening is they're not really, they haven't processed any of those emotions. Instead, they have experienced an intense deactivation of their attachment system, where it's almost like they're turning off their feelings to you. It's not really conscious. Again, it's just that that's the response in their nervous system to feeling intensely hurt, intensely betrayed. And so this allows them where they feel like, oh, I don't have any feelings for you anymore, in that lacking of self-awareness, they kind of think that. And then they feel like they can move forward. But really it's all happening in a very triggered or very activated sort of state. Now, there are also times when fearful avoidance may move on quickly after long-term relationships or just like seem fine after them. And I want to paint another scenario that can happen. So I've had clients, for example, who were back-to-back relationship people, especially before becoming secure. They really did not have long periods at all where they were alone. And one example is one of my clients who I'm working with now. She would stay really long in relationships that she actually kind of knew weren't a good fit for her. And so she would essentially stay until she was so hurt and just so done that she actually had been grieving that relationship while she was still in it. And she would stay too long with someone who knew wasn't right for her while mentally and emotionally preparing for the ending. And then once she finally got out of that relationship, she would jump right into the next one. And she would like feel ready because, again, she was grieving that relationship while still in it. Now, this isn't necessarily the healthiest thing because she knew long before then that they weren't the right fit for her. And she, in her journey towards becoming more secure, has recognized that she needs to leave sooner. And she actually did this in her last relationship where she recognized, okay, there are red flags, and I've put up with these for too long in past relationships, and I'm not going to keep putting up with them in this one. And so, as she ended that relationship much sooner, she's had to learn how to sit with the sadness and actually like grieve those emotions post breakup. So then this is like, okay, now she's actually having to take this time to be with herself, to learn how to be alone, to get to know who she is single before jumping into something new. So that's one thing, one kind of scenario that can happen that I've actually seen with a lot of clients where it's kind of like they don't really know how to be alone, coupled with the fact that they're, staying too long in these relationships and already grieving the ending while in them. Now, let's talk about dismissive avoidance for a moment. So, oftentimes, these are the ones who can seem really unaffected by the breakup afterward, and they will like kind of just ice you out sometimes. Where sometimes the fearful avoidance can be a little hot and cold after the ending. Sometimes they're not. It kind of depends on how hurt they felt, whether by something you've done or whether just by their own triggers kind of coming up, and that perception of, oh, you hurt me, when really maybe something happened that just hit a core wound for them. And so with the dismissive avoidance, what's actually happening when they are feeling like they're just, fine, or they're acting like they're fine, they probably perceive that like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I'm just fine. Maybe like you're just, you have a harder time with breakups than I do. It's just, not that hard for me. You might hear them say things like this. And it might just feel so confusing when you're like, what the heck? I'm grieving so hard over here. Aren't you sad over, what we lost? So there, a lot of this has to do with their coping mechanism. One of the big ones being suppressing and not feeling their feelings. So dismissive avoidance experienced a lot of emotional neglect growing up. And so having emotions at all brings up a lot of shame for them. And it brings up these belief systems like there's something wrong with me because I have emotions. I'm bad because I have emotions. It's just something that they were not really allowed to have, or it was always met with rejection. And so their survival strategy is just to stuff it all down. And they might even feel a sense of relief initially after the breakup because they're not getting triggered as much by, maybe it's the closeness, maybe it's the expectations that you as their partner had, that you wanted them to work on something, or even just that you wanted them to communicate with you. Dismissive avoidance have kind of some interesting expectations for their partners, whether they'll voice them or not, that aren't actually realistic. They aren't necessarily healthy, but it just comes from the relationships that they had modeled for them growing up. And so for a few, weeks or even a few months after a breakup, the dismissive avoidant might feel better or might think that they feel better, but it's mostly that they're just numb. And so this is why they'll seem fine. Meanwhile, you're in the thick of all the heavy emotions. But the dismissive avoidant is just kind of stuffing everything down, and eventually that will surface, even if you don't get to see that. I think it's knowing that no matter how these different people have reacted, they do have pain, they just kind of experience it and cope with it in different ways, and that might look different than how you do. I had one very dismissive ex who didn't realize that he wasn't over his previous relationship until like 7 months later. And that was 3 months into our relationship. So again, he was 3 months into a new relationship with someone else, me. And it took until that point for him to realize he hadn't actually processed his previous breakup. So, to give you any idea how lacking in self-awareness and how numb some people can be, there's an example for you. And you know what? I imagine that his ex never really like got the whether it's the validation or whatever you want to call it, of knowing that like he was actually that sad over her, that he did have, maybe regrets about breaking up, that he did, you know, feel like he lost something good. But I saw that side, So just know that, again, you aren't seeing the whole picture when someone reacts this way. And another part of this is that the way that they cope might not be as expressive. And, the way that they process their emotions might not be as expressive as it is for you. And oftentimes they may lean on more unhealthy coping mechanisms, like different ways to numb, whether that's through food or gaming or scrolling or TV, alcohol, other substances, anything to numb out. And another feature kind of the dismissive avoidant attachment style and attachment avoidant attachment in general is they have a lot of these deactivating strategies to help prevent themselves from feeling vulnerable. So deactivating, again, meaning they kind of like turn off their attachment system. And so one of these is flaw finding. Now, when a relationship ends, they often tend to focus on all the reasons that this person wasn't the right fit for them. And then it becomes this running list of reasons to write that person off, including things that maybe weren't the most even problematic. Like they might not have been real issues, but the DA is going to kind of tell themselves all these stories so that they don't really have to deal with feeling like the loss or the depth of loss from that person. They have this idea that, well, if it were the right person for me, then it just would have worked out because, things ended. Clearly, we weren't the right fit. They kind of have this idea that, like, the right person, you won't experience this struggle or this conflict. And so that must just mean, this is not the right person for me. And again, this is part of that strategy to help prevent themselves from deeply feeling the loss of another person because growing up, it was never really an option for them to emotionally need or depend on their caregivers, right? They have a lot of like pain around rejection whenever they would express their emotions or whenever they would need someone in an emotional way. They just didn't get that, or they got it very minimally, or it led to pain, shaming, maybe abuse, could be lots of different things. So their survival strategies to convince themselves that they don't really need, another person to begin with. Meanwhile, someone who's more anxious, they're going to be doing the opposite in a lot of ways, where like you're focusing on all the reasons that it was a good relationship and things could have worked out. And sometimes this is even skewed, where that person might be like up on a pedestal in your mind, and all you can see are the ways that it could have worked out and how great your connection was. And that can also make it harder for someone, maybe more anxious leaning, to actually process well and move on and let go. So this kind of brings me into my next topic, which is I want to talk about what healthy versus unhealthy coping kind of looks like, because we've talked a lot about maybe the avoidance side of things and the ways that that can look not the healthiest. And so I'm going to talk about healthy and then also some other unhealthy tendencies. So hopefully by now we've established that moving on quickly typically isn't a healthy response. Now, there may be some scenarios, for example, like someone is fighting really hard for a marriage and they're just seeing over and over again that their partner will not meet them there. I've seen this happen for clients. I've seen this happen for people that I'm very close to in my life, where it's like their spouse was doing things that were actively hurting them and not willing to get the help and the accountability to actually change their behavior. And so eventually it's like, when you've really given that your relationship your all, yeah, there's going to be grieving and pain and things like that that you do have to process regardless. But sometimes there is a lot of processing that happens in the relationship too. Now, I'm not advocating jumping from getting divorced immediately into a relationship by any means. But what I'm saying is that, in general, you want to work on leaving sooner when you're in relationships, right? But sometimes in marriages where there's a stronger commitment, people might do more grieving while still in the relationship. And so, you might find that you've done a lot of processing before the paperwork is technically signed, for example. But generally speaking, moving on super quickly, not typically the healthiest. Feeling your feelings is healthy. Needing time to process is healthy. Taking space to be alone is healthy. Also, needing to take distance and block or remove that person, whether from social media or just from other scenarios in your life, that is a very normal, healthy thing and will help you move on sooner. I'll talk more about this and what the flip side of this looks like in a moment. But if you are on the other side of some of these avoidant, these breakups with these avoidants, whether as an anxious attacher or a fearful avoiding yourself, these are some unhealthy tendencies that I often see with clients coming up. And I want to point your attention to some of these because you might be doing some of these. So think of this as kind of like a little check-in on yourself of like, how healthy am I actually processing this experience myself? And is there room for me to do it in a more secure way? So here's a list to check yourself for. Not healthy processing would look like this. You're ruminating and internalizing this person's behavior. There's like obsessive thoughts, you're kind of fixating on it, you're spending a lot of time talking about it and intellectualizing it, but you're not necessarily feeling it. Another one would be waiting for him to come back around, waiting for him to change his mind. You're just like here, like hoping, waiting. Another one would be holding out for him to change, even when he's shown you that he can't give you what you want or need or deserve in a relationship. Jumping into something new, or maybe even going on dates with someone else right away. Okay. Sometimes, we might do this when we're more on the anxious side of our attachment too, and just kind of feel like we need someone. So it's important to learn how to process your feelings and not need another partner to sort of pacify them. Like you can lean on your girlfriends, lean on your community, your support system. Don't go like seeking another guy because you're definitely not going to be emotionally available yourself right after a situation like this if you haven't actually done the processing. You're probably going to lead with a lot of fear, a lot of pain. You might show up very guarded. And one of my clients loved this analogy of, we called it like her heart bucket. She loved analogies when she was working with me, where we're like, okay, if your heart bucket is full with a lot of, pain and love and all the things for a previous person, like you need to take some time to process that and empty the bucket a little bit before you can have space for like more love for someone else to fill it. So check on your heart bucket. Do you actually have the capacity to be going on dates right now, to, be open to a genuine connection with someone else? Another one would be jumping straight from dating your ex to being friends with your ex with no break to heal and grieve and take space. It doesn't make you weak or mean that you care too much if you need to set boundaries and move on. That's actually a super healthy thing. This is something I've had to explain to a few clients. Like, hey, cutting someone off completely after a breakup is normal and healthy. You do not owe that person anything. It doesn't make you like strong or like you've got it together, to try to maintain a connection with this person. You need that space, that separation to allow yourself to actually move on from that person. Healthy people don't try to be friends with their ex right away in like 99.99% of cases. I'm not saying you can never like be friends with your ex. There are some situations where maybe that can be okay, but you don't need to do it right away. Another one would be constantly checking his social media or his location, rereading text messages that you guys had, like going through the photos, especially if you're doing this kind of on repeat. What I would encourage you to do is take all those photos. Well, first of all, delete the text messages. Second of all, take the photos, put them in like a hidden folder, download them to like an external hard drive or something on your computer. You don't have to get rid of them right away, but don't keep them in a place where you're constantly seeing them because every time you look at them, you're like reopening that wound and you're not really allowing yourself to start healing. Another one would be thinking about all the things you could have said or done differently to try to save the relationship. So this is similar to kind of the rumination and the fixation, on things that like, oh, maybe if I'd said it this way, or maybe if I'd done it this way, I could have saved it. And these are all pointing to like a deeper attachment wound. If this is coming up, I mean, all of these tendencies are, but this one especially, I've had a lot of clients talk about this kind of behavior, and it really is pointing to a deeper wound, where you basically had to operate a certain way and feel like you always had to show up perfectly in order to like keep the relationship or keep love. A lot of the responsibility really fell on you, or your perception was of that when you were growing up, and this is kind of where this tendency comes from. There's a lot more I could say about that, but that's all I'll say about it for right now. Replaying conversations and situations in your head, like thinking about them over and over again. And then the last one that I kind of mentioned is being afraid to block this person or remove them from social media or totally cut them out because you're worried that it'll make you like seem weak or like you cared too much. And the part I want to add to this is that you need to stop fixating on like what he thinks of you, what his perception of you is. What about what you think of you? What about what's best for you? Your job is to take care of you and to look out for you first and foremost, especially over someone who, just broke your heart. Like you've got to really show up for yourself in this time. And so it's not your job to manage what he thinks of you, to manage his perception of you. And this isn't even something you really can do. It's like trying, this attachment to like controlling the narrative, controlling how he sees you. And you've got to learn how to give yourself the closure and stop fixating on like what he thinks and what he feels and all those things. So if these are your experience, you are probably not processing in a healthy way. Not probably. You're 100% not processing in a healthy way. And that's why this breakup is so hard for you. So all of these tendencies, I see them a lot with clients. I have a lot of clients who come to me shortly after breakups. All these tendencies are showing you that the pain you feel is about so much more than this current rejection. This rejection is actually triggering something deeper for you. It's triggering old pain. It's triggering attachment wounding in a very intense way that you're not equipped to process. If you were equipped to process it, you wouldn't be doing this list of things that I just mentioned. Um, so you're experiencing compounded pain, which is the pain of losing this person plus the pain of your attachment wounds from childhood. That's why it feels so heavy. When you've actually done the work to process your attachment wounds, you don't feel this intense heaviness when it comes to breakups. And I can think about like my experiences from, oh my gosh, like my first few breakups or like rejections. Like one was a situationship, one we dated for like 5 weeks, and then the other one was that 3 month relationship where the guy then realized he wasn't over his ex. Okay, it took me so long to get over all of those. like anywhere from like 8 months to a year to get over each of those individual scenarios. And then it was after that point that I started this work and hired my first coach. And this was even after I'd done therapy. Therapy really didn't help me at all. And I then had my most serious relationship while I started working with this coach. And he was really the first person that I was like, wow, I could actually marry this person. We were, compatible in a lot of ways, but there were also ways we weren't. It should have been the one that was hardest for me to get over, but it wasn't because I was no longer processing it through a lens of all my past pain and all my, I wasn't experiencing it as something that meant I was like unwanted or that there was something wrong with me or that I wasn't good enough or anything like that. I just had so much peace about the fact that, like, even though I really love and care about this person, he is not my person and we can't change that. And I could just appreciate so much more of the goodness of that relationship without, doing all the fixation and rumination. And it was interesting because it was really a different kind of grief that actually was like, it was bittersweet, where I was like, I feel good about the fact that this has ended. And also, I feel so grateful for that experience. And so, night and day experiences versus, from me pre-doing this work to me post doing this work. So that's what is in store for you when you do this work. So when you learn how to process in a healthy way, the things that are like, the rumination or like thinking about that person or even like replaying scenarios, that long list I gave is like 5% or less of your experience. It's not like that stuff is not a constant thing that goes on by any means. Now, when you are securely attached and when you know how to vet well for another person's emotional availability and emotional maturity, some things start to change. So, number one, you're able to process rejection without taking it personally, like I just shared, without all the rumination, without all the overthinking. It doesn't feel like a huge hit to your self-esteem. And you're not just like trying to convince yourself it's not about you. When you are actually more secure, you like instinctively know that you're not doing all this convincing. And if you have some feelings or some triggers that come up, you can like process it super easily, super quickly. And then it's just like, oh, that was just a feeling that came to visit for a little bit. That's not a story that has power over me at this point. You're able to move on in a healthy way that is probably more quickly than what you're doing if you're hanging out in like the rumination and overthinking kind of place. But you're also not moving on too quickly where you're rebounding or avoiding your feelings. And it's almost coming from a like, well, if he's moving on quickly, like I have to prove that I can too sort of place. Or even like, if you hurt me, then I'm just going to find someone else who won't. Like I can replace you back sort of thing. And this happens again because you know how to process rather than intellectualize your feelings. And when you're more knowledgeable about how to vet and attach in a slower, more secure way, you don't really feel blindsided nearly as much. When people kind of do things like this, you'll see the yellow flags a lot sooner. You'll see them before they become red flags. And then you can make the decision to walk away sooner, often before you're actually attached to that person, because you could see the signs that they weren't emotionally available. And all these things, by the way, are things that I teach you inside my one-on-one program, Attachment Alchemy. So if you're a successful woman ready to become secure in yourself and attract someone who's emotionally available, you can apply via the link and read more details in the show notes. Inside Attachment Alchemy, you learn to become secure in yourself, to spot yellow, red, and green flags of emotional availability and unavailability so that you can attract someone who's healthy. You'll learn to attach more slowly and securely. And you'll also learn the secure relationship skills required to keep and maintain healthy love, to help yourself feel secure in the dynamic. Things like how to set boundaries, how to stop abandoning yourself and, trying to keep or get love, how to communicate your needs and your feelings in a way that won't push your partner away, and instead in a way that will help create more intimacy and closeness and connection. And you'll learn all this and a whole lot more inside Attachment Alchemy. Once again, you can apply and read the details in the show notes. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'm wishing you lots of luck and love on your journey towards becoming more secure.